What's up guys, PJ from 3D Printing Canada. So today in front of me I have a CR-10S Pro V2. It's actually one of my more preferred printers here in the shop. But what I like to do to it, like I like to do to all Creality machines, is install a micro Swiss direct drive. You can never go wrong with this direct drive. It prints TPU like a champ, as well as all the other abrasive materials without any worry. So this is a worry-free direct drive. Absolutely love it. We're also going to be installing the Sat-Sana Micro Swiss direct drive print that's available on Thingiverse. We will leave links for this in the description. What it does is it accepts that 4020 blower fan that's installed on the CR-10S Pro V2. So without further ado, let's get into that disassemble and upgrade video. All right guys, so the first thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna take out the remaining filament that's still in the printer. Now a little tip and trick, I don't like to use the machine to unload the filament. What I always like to do is make sure I take this filament, push the little arm lever here, all right, and push some filament through. So you wanna go ahead and push until you see filament coming out the bottom, and then quickly pull out the filament really quick, and you will always end up with a nice clean pull, just as long as you make sure you push some filament through. So the next step we're gonna do here, guys, is we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna shut the printer down now. That way I don't have anything on. We won't be reusing any of these components that I'm taking off, except for the fans. So we'll start. There's 2 screws here to take your fan shroud off, okay? So we'll go ahead and remove those. Set them aside, okay? We got that fan shroud removed. Now what I like to do is cut away any zip ties that are in the way for now. Be careful you don't snip any of your wires underneath there. And I'll go ahead and pull that sheathing back, that braided cable protector. I'm gonna take our fan off. So this is the 4020 blower fan we're taking off right now. Get that one removed. We won't be reusing the cooling fan shroud, just the fan itself. And then I'll go ahead and I will remove the heatsink fan, these 4 M3 bolts here. Go ahead and remove those. So there's another part we won't be using anymore, the fan shroud or the cooling duct. Okay, so now that we've got our fans removed, I like to go ahead and move them out of the way and put them in the back, and then what I'll do is I'll pick this little bit of glue off they put on the BL Touch. And go ahead and we'll get that off. Now be careful guys, you don't want to damage your BL Touch wires or you're going to be buying a new cable. And again, carefully just kind of pull that out. Remove your BL Touch. With the 2 M3 screws at the top here, we'll go ahead and remove that. Now we will be reusing the BL Touch. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna remove the hot end. Really simple guys, these things are just nuts and bolts. So if you're okay with a wrench, you'll be okay doing this. All right. So the next step we're gonna do, be careful if you've just heated up your hot end like I did, this thing's still extremely hot. We wanna go ahead and get our thermistor and heater cartridge out. Now the heater cartridge is held in with this 1 grub screw here, 1.5 mil. You don't have to take it out all the way, just enough that the heater cartridge is loose enough. I actually ended up taking it out all the way. Actually put that back in there so we don't lose it. Even though we won't be using these parts again and they literally become completely useless. I'm gonna go ahead and I'll take my Phillips driver here, carefully. Now this is part, if they've got any type of thermal grease in there with your thermistor, this is the part where you need to be a bit careful, because we don't wanna rip that thermistor. Now, will it rip? Possibly. depending on how hard that thermal grease is in there, it might rip and I might have to replace it. No, we're good. It actually came out nice and clean. The glass bead is still on there, is it? Yeah, it looks like. Just double check, make sure. Let's take a look there. Yep, our glass bead is still intact. Now, if you're wondering if it isn't, all you gotta do is turn on your printer and we'll just take a look, make sure that thermistor is still giving us a reading. It takes a minute for the printer to load up. All right, and we still have a thermistor reading on our nozzle, so it didn't get damaged. Not all of them come with the thermal grease in there. Some of them do. It actually looks like boron nitride paste, so that's probably what's in there, because that stuff dries really hard as opposed to the grease, and that stuff was pretty hard. So just be careful when you're taking that out. You don't want to damage it. If you do, it's not the end of the world. You know, you can grab a new thermistor. No big deal. Go ahead and we'll pop out this little C-clip here, which was put on backwards for some reason. Okay, let's see if we can get that tube out. So we will not be reusing the hot end. We're done with that. And unfortunately, we will not be reusing the extruder, which is a very good extruder. This is one of the Creality dual gear. So we will go ahead and take all this apart. I like to start with the extruder arm itself. So we'll start by removing the extruder arm because that one's got the spring tension on it. So I'll remove that one first. Okay. Now, this extruder is a good extruder. So you guys could keep it, resell it on Facebook Marketplace, Kijiji, wherever you feel like you wanted to, but they're definitely, keep this intact because it is totally resellable. So that is one part I would say you don't need to discard. The hot end, I mean, unless you got a buddy or something that might need it or doesn't want to upgrade, I mean, you could always give it away or sell it to somebody, but it is literally, none of the parts will work with the micro Swiss stuff. So I'll go ahead and take the last 3 screws out to free up our motor. Now guys, remember, if you're unplugging motors at all at any time or plugging them in, if your machine is on, you have a high risk of actually blowing the stepper driver. It will send voltage back to the board and potentially blow your driver. So we don't want to do that. So anytime you're doing anything with stepper motors, make sure the machine's unplugged and turned off. At minimum, at least turned off. All right. So now that we've got the motor off, we're going to go ahead and take this Bondtech style gear off. It's just one set screw that slides off. And this motor we will be reusing. Okay, so the next step here is we're gonna go ahead and take the wheel carriage off. The only thing you're actually gonna save from this is the wheels themselves. So go ahead and take an 8mm wrench, okay, and a 3mm hex driver. I prefer to use a good set of hex drivers over Allen keys any day of the week, unless you have to torque something down and you need the leverage of a an Allen key. So we'll go ahead and we'll pop these wheels off. Like I said, this is the only thing you're gonna save. Even the hardware you won't be reusing. Go ahead and we'll take the first one off. We'll be reusing the wheel, so we'll keep the wheel on the build platform. We actually won't even be reusing any of the nuts. But we will be reusing the eccentric nut on the bottom wheel. So that is one we will be reusing. Once you got the first top two off, it'll just come right off. Okay, save that wheel. And I just like to go ahead and pop off these here. Now your belt's off. We'll take the wheel and eccentric nut we still need to reuse off. So go ahead and unscrew that. I always like to keep the hardware around just in case I'm gonna reuse any of it. So we'll be keeping the eccentric nut, extremely important. and the wheel. All right. So the next step we're gonna go on to is we're gonna actually open up the micro Swiss now. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you probably already know what comes inside the box. You get the little QR scanner for any instructions you might need if you wanted to just follow along with the instructions. We get our heat sink and heat break come in a bag here. So we'll go ahead and remove those. All right, I like to take them apart because I assemble things separately, which you'll see in a moment. So we'll go ahead and get those on our build plate. And you get your extruder arm with the Bondtech style gear. And then you get some hardware packages, the spring tensioner for the arm, along with the nut for it, as well as the collared bolt that goes through your arm. So that comes in one bag. And you get some additional hardware that we'll be using first here. So I'm actually gonna open this up because we will be using this on the, to assemble the wheels onto the carriage. So I'll go ahead and I'll actually dump that out. Now, I wanna make a real big point about this. This is extremely important. Guys, I get a lot of customers come in and they forget about this C-clip here. Okay, so this C-clip is extremely important. We'll show you later on in the video. Do not lose this. So I don't wanna lose this. I tend to drop things while I'm working a lot, unfortunately. So with this, I'm gonna put it back in the box so I don't lose it. And we have our stepper motor extension cable. I'm actually just gonna put that one aside, not on the build plate, because it's gonna be in my way. We go ahead and we have our heater block here. So we'll go ahead and we'll open that up and show you guys, because that'll be something we're assembling really soon as well. So we'll go ahead and we'll put that heater block. Now Micro Swiss, just to let you guys know, has come out with a high temperature heater block now. It's absolutely wonderful. I will be installing one on my personal machine soon, but the nice thing is about the new one, this one's only made for glass bead. Now the new heater block they have for higher temperatures, I've still been able to run this one at 320 without a problem. Might wear your glass bead down a little faster, but what Micro Swiss did to innovate a little better, which they always do, is they made a slot for the cartridge style thermistors in it as well. And the block's just a tiny bit bigger, works really well. I will be installing one on my personal machine very soon. So that's our heater block. Then we have our actual carriage. Okay, this holds your wheels, your hot end, you know, the Satsana print we're about to install. So this is the first thing I like to install. And then after that, we've got our nozzle, which I'll just set aside for now, and some hardware. Now, Micro Swiss was kind enough to give you a wrench to tighten things down. I don't recommend using it. It's nice that they did give you something just in case you don't have the wrenches at home. I highly recommend getting yourself a nice low profile 7mm wrench. You want something solid. These are made out of a soft steel, and I'll show you why I don't use them. And I don't use the actual Allen key they give you either. I use my hex wrench. The reason I don't use this is because it's extremely soft steel. And when you're tightening things, especially a nozzle, it's just gonna round off. So avoid using this. It's okay in a pinch, but let's try to not use this wrench, okay guys? So I'm actually just gonna put that aside because that's going right into the garbage. Now, another thing, if you do use this to tighten down your set screw, be very careful. It will strip the screw out. I've done it. Take my advice on that one, guys. I like to use a nice 1.5mm hex driver with good quality steel. These even still wear it out over time, but I prefer to use these. And when you're using it on a little grub screw, you want to take your time and don't over tighten, because chances of stripping a 1.5 are very high, okay? So moving forward now, what I like to do is I like to take my bottom wheel, the longer nut goes through the wheel, and we take our eccentric nut here. Okay, so we've got our eccentric nut. Now that one's gonna need to face into the Micro Swiss itself where the bevel is, because that bevel is gonna sit right in the back of here, like so. And with the provided washer, as well as the provided nut. So washer and then nut, you just go ahead and get that started a little. And it is a nylon locking nut, so you're not going to get this on by hand. You'll only get it started. Again, now we take our 8mm wrench, paired with our 3mm driver here. And I just like to hold the wrench on there and give it a little tighten. Now, we'll explain eccentric nuts to you guys really quickly here and what they do. Okay, so the eccentric nut that we've just placed with this wheel, it has a bevel that goes inside this piece of aluminum. Same with the ones that are on the side of your printer. If your wheels spin too freely and you've got play, that's what these nuts are for. The bevel in the nut allows it to create a little bit of tension, whether it's a wheel against your extrusion, on the Z, or any axis. Your bed, your Y, your X, anything will have an eccentric nut to make sure as those wheels wear, you don't want wiggle in the head. So, all right, we're gonna go ahead now and take one of the wheels and one of the nuts, and we just put it on the carriage. We'll go ahead and just hand thread it in quickly there. So it goes on the back. There's no additional hardware needed. You take your 3mm, you just go ahead and tighten that wheel down, all right? Now, once you've got this one installed, this is where you might need to adjust the eccentric nut slightly to be able to get the other wheel on. Now, if you don't, great. If you do, you just go ahead and take that 8mm wrench, give it a little turn till you can get the wheel on. So we'll take our last and final wheel here. All right. Now, because I've done it so many times, I've got the eccentric nut tightened in the right position that I'm able to just get that third wheel on because the nut is in the right position. Now it's actually going to be a little loose. I'm going to actually have to tighten that eccentric nut now once I have the wheels on, and I'll show you why. Now it's all sloppy on there, but I was able to get the wheels on without having to do anything fancy or tricky. So now I just take my 10mm wrench on here, a little turn, another little turn. Actually, we'll have to raise the Z's here. Don't have enough room. Never do this too quick. You don't want to send voltage back to your drivers either that way. So go ahead with that 10mm wrench on the eccentric nut. Give it a little more of a tighten. And now you can see that moves nice and freely on there, nice and smooth, but it also doesn't have any play. Extremely important, especially if you don't want artifacting in your prints. You want to make sure there's no wiggle in there, but you also need to make sure it moves freely. Again, over time, these wheels will wear down. You will need to adjust the nut accordingly. And just for good practice, clean off the wear that comes on the wheels. All right, so the next thing I like to do here now is I like to put this belt on. There is no way, though, it is gonna reach with the stock, the way the stock setup was. So you just go ahead and you put one on, just hooks under, very simply like the other one does. Here you've got these two little hooks for your belt to slide in. It's the exact same on the Micro Swiss. So you just slide one hook in. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen off the T-nuts for the belt tension side. Oh, that one's really good. So we're gonna wanna go ahead and move this in a little further. Sometimes you actually have to take it off. It just depends on your printer. And in this case, it now fits on. Now the belt's extremely loose. So what you wanna do is you wanna pull back here. Make sure you got the right tension. Now you don't want too loose and you don't want too tight. Too loose will skip steps, too tight can skip steps. So what you wanna do is just pull back, you get that right tension on there, and then tighten the one nut down. Sometimes you gotta loosen them right off to get them to flip around inside there. You'll know when it happens. All right, and then I'll go ahead and make sure that's nice and level. Don't want no crooked looking. Okay, the belt tension, just double check it. That's good. Perfect. Now the final nut, you can see it, so you'll know if it's flipped inside the extrusion the right way or not. In my case, mine's already ready to go. I'll tighten that down real nice. So we don't want that backing off at all. So now our belt's back installed. Now, the next step I like to do, and personally I think this is extremely critical in the build process, I like to go ahead and partially assemble the hot end assembly. So what I'll do here is I will grab my heat brake, okay? You don't want the nut side of the bolt facing the heat break. You want that facing the nozzle, okay? So the nut side is not where the heat break goes. That's where your nozzle goes, your heat break goes, and the screw side where you can see just the little screw heads coming through. So we'll go ahead and we'll tighten that down. Now, I grabbed my 7mm wrench. Like I said, we're not gonna use the one that comes with the kit, even though it was really nice of Micro Swiss to include just in case you don't have one. But again, I prefer that you guys would use a good wrench as opposed to that. So we'll go ahead and we'll take our adjustable wrench. We're gonna put it on that block like that. That way we've got something gripping it. Go ahead and just give that a little tighten. We're not cranking it down, just nice and snug. We don't wanna strip anything. Heat breaks on. So next, we will take our nozzle. Comes in a bag by itself. These bags come in handy for hardware and stuff. They're nice, good, thick bags too, guys. So if you want to keep those for some hardware, leftover stuff, whatever, works great. Now again, we don't want to over crank this because we don't want to snap nozzles off inside the block. But what I do want to do is give it an extra little tighten. Now, I'll take my heater cartridge and thermistor and install them. All right, pretty easy. Pretty easy. The first thing I'll tighten down is that heater cartridge with your 1.5. Now again, guys, once it's snugged up, we don't need to over tighten this to where it's bent the aluminum so far that it's touching. Realistically, we just don't want that heater cartridge to push out, okay? So that's all. Actually, didn't cut mine in far enough. I'll back that off. Get it in all the way and retighten. Now again, that doesn't need to be over tightened, boys and girls. We'll just make sure. Now, even for nozzle changes, I take this piece out of the heatsink, and as I'm installing it, I'll explain why. I always like to do my heat tightening and nozzle changes with this completely outside of our heatsink. Now, you might ask yourself, why does he do that? Well, simple reason is, picture this being on here, you've got it inserted, you've got your adjustable wrench snuck on there somehow. Now you're torquing and bending. This is actually being held in on the wheel carriage. Now what that does is, while you're torquing and bending, potentially you're gonna bend the thin part of the heat brake, then you're replacing your heat brake. So if you wanna do it like I do and never have to worry about wrecking your heat brake, even when you change your nozzle, it's one set screw, it pops out, it's easy. So now that we've got that set up the way I like to do it, we just have to put in the little Phillips head screw that Micro Swiss provides to hold our thermistor in. Now guys, I cannot stress enough about this part. If you're new to 3D printing and you never change the thermistor or anything, you can do this. I've done it, everybody does it. Do not over tighten this. If you pinch those wires and short them out, you're replacing your thermistor. It's no good anymore. So what I do is, once it gets down onto it, I just make sure, okay, that's not gonna fall out. And all it is snugged up against there. Not too tight, not too loose where it's gonna fall out. Keep that in mind. Now, let's turn our printer on. So I'm gonna go ahead and heat this up. Now, when you're heat tightening, printer's maximum temperature. In this case, because I haven't updated the firmware yet, which I will be changing, the firmware will be able to handle 300 now. I'm not gonna push it above 300. Glass beads will start to break down in those temperature ranges. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit it at 260. We'll wait for that to heat up and then we'll heat tighten everything and I'll show you guys what's going on there. Okay guys, so we'll just give you a little heads up. While you're heating up like this, yes, the first time it's ever heated up, the metal is gonna smoke a little bit. Don't worry about it. It's not gonna cause any problems. You will get a little bit of smoke coming off of the heat block and stuff like that. So now, if your printer thermal runaways while you're doing this, it's no big deal. You're putting an adjustable wrench onto a piece of aluminum. These things have fail safes built in. If it drops below 10 degrees, it's gonna thermal run away and halt the heater. No big deal, just shut it off. So it might happen to me, so you guys might actually see it, but I tend to try and do it quick enough. So I'll go ahead, I'll get that on there at 260. And I'll give that nozzle an extra little tighten. That's it. And you're just really, just that slight little bit. You don't have to turn too much. And all that's really doing is heat tightening your nozzle to your heat break so there's no space in there, no chance for leakage. This part, guys, I cannot stress enough, it's extremely important. So make sure you follow these steps properly, because if not, you're gonna end up with jams and all kinds of problems. When it's done correctly, this is like literally, besides a couple other hot ends, this is my favorite hot end to use. I print TPU on it all the time, PETG carbon fiber. I've printed nylon carbon fiber with it. The list goes on. So absolutely love this one, guys. Now, because there's no filament in there, I'm not worried about it cooling down slowly or anything. I'm just gonna go ahead and shut the machine off. Now, next step is you wanna go ahead and we're gonna take a little bag that comes with a couple spare pieces, like spare push fitting that holds your Bowden tube in, and they give you a spare set screw and C-clip. So all we need is the one set screw, the 2 bolts, and we'll put the one set screw, the extra C-clip, whatnot. You're gonna keep that, guys, don't lose it. It's a spare. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna take our little piece of Bowden tube here, and this one just pops in and it doesn't go down too far, guys. That's what the whole point of an all metal hot end is to eliminate Bowden tube touching the nozzle. But we still need a little piece. So now that we've got that there, we're ready to install this. But what I like to do first is get the motor and the gear on. That way when this slides up through, you're not trying to push the gear on the motor past the tube. So I'll go ahead and I'll install the motor. Now everything installs with a 2 mil. So they've got some countersunk 3 mil here. They look like 3 by, I wanna say that's maybe 6 mil. We'll go ahead and we don't tighten these right down yet. Now guys, we do have available pancake stepper motors if you'd like to use one. They're not necessarily for everybody. Some people say they were getting skip steps with them, but I mean, I personally use one and don't have a problem, so we'll leave that option up to you. You can get the pancake stepper motor. It'll help reduce ringing and stuff that can come out in direct drives when you start hitting speeds. So, and all I'm doing is kind of snugging those at first. I'll open up the bag with the spring tensioner and everything. So we'll go ahead and we'll open that up now. Okay, now what we're after is the collared 2 mil. Still a 2 mil head, but it's collared. Reason being is for the arm, like so it can spin freely. So we'll go ahead and we'll install the last piece that holds the motor and the arm together here. We'll tighten that down. Then we'll tighten down the others. Make sure they're nice and secure. Okay, all right, that's great. Now what I like to do is go ahead and get that gear on. Now this is gonna be with a 1.5 mil driver. You'll need to back it out a little bit so it can get on the shaft. And we'll back that out a little bit on the flat spot. And then what I like to do is just bring up the arm, make sure they're lined up nicely. I'll use the arm to hold it in place. And go ahead. Now this is another one. This is a set screw, or a grub screw as they're called. You wanna make sure not to strip it. Once you give it that little bit of a tighten, that's it. Don't overdo it, you'll strip it, I can promise you. Now the next piece I'm going to install, and I'm gonna leave the arm loose still. All right, I'm not gonna put the spring tensioner in yet. I like to go ahead and slide up that piece of Bowden tube in to meet those gears and make sure everything meets nicely. I'll grab my 2 mil driver here. And we'll go ahead and install the heatsink. Again, not over tightening that one because we do have 2 pieces to put in. 2 bolts, excuse me, to put in. So we'll go ahead, once we got the second one in, let's make sure it's level. Tighten it down. Okay, now we're ready. Just make sure, that's why I left that arm spring out, so I could give this tube a little bit of a turn if it needed it. There we go. Perfect. So now we'll take the spring and the pin, like so. We'll go ahead and slide those through. Now it does have a flat spot that needs to meet up here to make its way through there. And then our thumb screw just goes on the end. Now, something that's extremely important, this thumb screw should only, the thread should only just meet the outside of it. If you tighten it any more than that, you're actually causing these gears to bind against each other. We don't want that. We want them to move nice and smooth like so. We don't want those binding together. So now we've got all that assembled. We just need to take our set screw, which I seem to have misplaced one of them. So I will be using the spare one for now until I find my other set screw. Again, I'm sure if you've watched any of my other videos, I'm famous for dropping things. So what you can do here, I'm probably pretty much positive that this is still pretty hot. I'm gonna just take my 7mm wrench and put it on the nozzle, and I'm gonna use this to hold it in place while I tighten the set screw. Now remember what I said about set screws, guys. This has to be done just to where it's snug. You keep going, promise you're gonna strip that screw out. So let's try and avoid that. Especially if you strip the aluminum inside these threads. Nobody wants to, you know, oversize it, tap it out. Yeah, it's all doable, but let's avoid all that at all costs. All right, then we take our sock. You wanna put your sock on now, because once you got your fan shroud on, yeah, you can still get it on, but yes, it is a bit of a pain. So we'll go ahead and we'll put our silicone sock on now. And here we go. Now you've got your micro Swiss, direct drive and hot end installed. We'll move on to the next step, which will be installing the fans, the fan shroud, attaching the motor cable, and a little bit of firmware, and then we'll be done. So the first thing I like to do is I like to take the Sat Santa mount and the BL Touch. Now I'm gonna use some of the leftover hardware to install the BL Touch. Now personally, I like to leave it facing outwards. You can have it facing inwards, but it's much easier to get at the cable if you ever have to do any type of work or anything. It's much easier to get at the cable if you leave it facing outward so it's accessible. So we'll go ahead and install that. Now remember, you're threading into plastic, so once it's snug, it's snug. You don't need to keep threading and try and tightening. That's when you're potentially just gonna wear out the plastic. Now we used PETG carbon fiber, our house brand PETG carbon fiber. It is absolutely my favorite material to print with for any type of mounts or anything like that, adding onto a 3D printer. It has about 10% carbon dust in it, so there's no chunks, so it's actually really easy to print. It's not hard to dial. And you can pick that up at our website as well, at 3dprintingcanada.com. Just look under PETG and it'll be the house brand PETG carbon fiber. Okay, now what I like to do here is I will pre-install. Now some of the mounts are different. I'll get that one kind of just started in there. And then the second one as well. It's only 2 mounting pieces. So I like to get those all installed, and then I'll install the fans after. So what I will do here is show you guys these cables slip around, in and around into this little groove. And then we'll have to stand up to get a little bit better of a visual here until there's the first one. Now don't tighten this one right down. And if you've got thick drivers like mine, it won't fit in that little hole. So I'll be right back in a moment, guys. I've just got to grab a hex wrench. So now we'll take a 2mm Allen wrench, get it in on there, and we'll just go ahead and thread it in. Now the reason I left it loose is that way if that hole isn't lined up and it starts pushing your print out, you've got enough room to move it around and until you get it into position. Like so. I'm now into the actual threaded hole. At first I wasn't, and it started pushing the print out. That's where you need to stop and get it back into position. Now once that one's snugged down nice and tight, not too tight, I'll go ahead and tighten the second one. Now we have our SAT-Santa cooling duct and BL touch mount installed. All right. Now the next step will be, I will go ahead and I will install our heatsink fan and our 2040 blower fan, which just slips right over top like so, and it actually snaps right into place nicely. And we just reuse our hardware. So if you're like me and you want easy access to your printer, what you do is you go ahead and you only need 2 screws in this. You don't need to put all of them in. Now, because you're threading into plastic, you probably have to push a little bit to get it started at first. Now we're in the hole. Now this it only needs to be snugged up. You don't need to over tighten your fan. Just don't want it wiggling around. I know, like I said, guys, I only use 2 screws. That way if you ever need to take it off, it's only 2 screws. You can use all 4 if you want, but we're only gonna use 2. So that's all that's needed. And you don't wanna over tighten them and bend the fan housing, because if you bend the fan housing, potentially this will rub and make everything unbalanced in here. So again, it only needs to be snugged up. So then what I'll do next is I'll take the remaining screws that were left from the 4020, and we'll go ahead and make sure everything lines up. And in this case, it's only 1 screw that gets installed on this fan. So it's just the 1 screw for this guy. Go ahead and tighten it up. Now if you do find there's a little bit of a gap, it's not really a big deal. Just take your hot glue gun, just put a little bead around there, and that'll take care of that problem. And just make it so you can pull the bead off if you ever needed to. So now that we have our fans installed, we will go ahead, and I like to just pass that BL touch wire through that first duct that's got a little air opening here on the side of the SAT-Santa. What I'll do is I'll pass that BL touch through, and all this is gonna go back in here and get zip tied against there. We'll go ahead and reinstall that, get rid of any tension, and we will be zip tying 1 zip tie to here. Not everybody uses it, I still do. So I'll just go ahead and we'll take the provided zip ties that Micro Swiss includes in the kit. And we'll go ahead and take 1 zip tie, move that cabling down here, just to protect everything a little bit better. We'll go ahead and just zip tie this onto the arm. Okay, like so. Okay, so we'll have our motor cable. Now what I personally like to do with this cable is I'm gonna install it, and then I'm gonna take a bigger zip tie. I'm gonna fold the cable over a bit, like so, and put a zip tie here. Reason being is the movement's gonna happen here now, not at the crimps, which can potentially wear your cable out over time. So we're gonna wrap a little zip tie around here. All right, so before we move any forward, we're gonna install that zip tie we talked about, as well as the little piece of Bowden tube. Now, if you follow Micro Swiss's instructions, a lot of times they run the Bowden tube back over to the filament sensor. I don't do that. I don't use that Bowden tube. It basically is gonna be a hindrance if you ever get a jam in using what we call an extruder cleaner, which we also sell on our website. It's on 3dprintingcanada.com. It's called extruder cleaner, and it's a good way. It's a little rod you can push through and push filament out. Say your filament broke off right here and you pop this out, you could go ahead and push that through with the extruder cleaner. This is where that C-clip comes into place. It just goes in this little slot, and then it pops in to hold that Bowden tube from moving around. So now, all I like to do is I like to take this zip tie and I'll run it under the motor and run it around the wire. Now before I tighten down, I like to give a little bit of slack so those wires are facing upwards. And now, you don't have to worry about any of these connections moving around because it's gonna move in the front now rather than at the crimped ends on your JST connector. So now we'll just cut away our remaining zip ties. Okay guys, so next what we're gonna do here is we're gonna be installing some T-nuts. Now I personally prefer to use Dropin Tnuts, which we also sell, rather than the ones that turn inside. So I'm not sure if you guys can see that very well, but it's a Dropin Tnut. Okay, I prefer to use these. So you just drop them into the extrusion, boom, done. So you don't have to worry about turning it or anything. So this customer had actually forgot to bring me in his spool holder. So what you would want to do, unfortunately I don't have one with me right now, is just go ahead and put your spool holder on the top right here. So we're gonna go ahead and drop in those T-nuts, and then we'll put our spool holder on the top. And like I said, unfortunately this customer didn't bring in their spool holder, so I don't have one available with me for this build. But with that being said, just go ahead and install your spool holder right on the top here. Now that I've got those T-nuts dropped in, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna unplug my filament sensor. You will also need this cable here, okay? It's an extension cable for your filament runout sensor, so you can mount your filament sensor up at the top now that we're direct drive, okay? So that's called a 3-pin JST XH extension. It's got 18 gauge wire, so you can find that on our website as well. But we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna unscrew the filament sensor. Now we'll only be reusing 2 pieces of the hardware bolts here. We'll go ahead and unscrew that. And you only need to save 2 of them. And of course, you know, keep your hardware kicking around, because it never hurts to have the old hardware from the old hot end and everything, just in case you ever need it again down the road. So keep any spare hardware kicking around. Now, just remember, sensor, arrow facing down. So I just like to start with 1 screw. Get it lined up with the 1 hole. And I don't tighten this all the way. I just snug it so I can still move it back and forth. That way for the next one, makes it easy because you can move it around, right? So just kind of got to look in to find where the hole is. And there it is. Go ahead and thread it down. You want to have that kind of in the middle of the printer. Have your spool holder over here. Now you have your filament sensor installed on the top. Now, we just take our extension cable, plug it into our filament sensor, and we'll just go ahead and, actually, this one's a little bit too far over, so I will just loosen it a bit, slide it in so I can get that sensor plugged in. Okay, move it over so there's not too much tension. If you need to, you can draw a little slack out of the back. You can put your spool holder on this side, it's up to you. I would in this case, with the filament sensor wire and everything, I would prefer to put it on this side, giving yourself more room. And now you have your filament sensor installed. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna flash the screen. Now I'm gonna use Tiny Machines firmware. They do a really good job on their firmware. They have a multi-pack for all the Creality printers. So we're gonna go ahead and use that. I'm just gonna format this memory card. The first thing you're gonna do is go ahead and format FAT32, and now right here, the actual size, we're gonna make it 4096, so 4096. We'll go ahead and we'll start the format on that. Oops. What did I do there? We'll start the format on that. That'll just take a second. Okay, the format has been completed. Now in my drive folder here, I will go under my firmwares. And then I've got a whole lot of firmwares on here, so yours won't look like this, but I've got the Tiny Machines multi-firmware here. Oops, wrong one, my bad. Clicked on the wrong one, right here, I have it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to use the Ender 5 Plus screen. So you wanna copy this file, the DWin set. You're gonna go ahead and copy that to your memory card, which you've just formatted. So we'll go ahead and we'll paste that. It'll take just a second to load that on. Okay, now that we've got the DWin set on there, we'll go ahead and we'll eject that memory card because we don't want to corrupt it. Now, what I want you guys to do is take the bottom of your machine off because this is the only way to flash the screen. So you're gonna go ahead, I didn't want to bore you guys with taking out screws off of the bottom of the machine, so you'll go ahead and take those off. You're gonna take your memory card, and you've got your screen here. We're gonna go ahead and there's a little slot for an SD card. We're gonna insert that. Now, all you gotta do is we'll get Jarrett to zoom in on the front of the screen here. On the front of this screen. So we'll get it all nice and zoomed up for you guys there. We'll go ahead and turn it on. Now what's gonna happen is because you've got the SD card in the screen, it's gonna power up and it's gonna go through some processes right now. And you're gonna wanna wait till all those processes finish, which takes a minute. There we go, now it's going through all the little screen menus it's flashing on. So once you get back to that original screen, it'll say end. So now at the top of the screen it says end, you know, we're done. We shut that off. Now we want to go ahead and back onto the computer end. Back onto the computer end here. We're going to go ahead and reinstall this SD card, but this time we are going to delete the DWin set off of there. We don't want that anything messing up when you put that back in your printer. So we'll go ahead and we'll delete the DWin set off. And we will eject our card because it's a must. You don't want corruption on your card. So we'll go ahead and we'll eject that. So now the next step is we're gonna open up Visual Studios. I'm gonna flip the printer over. We're gonna go into the Creality, the multi-firmware. I'm gonna show you how to load it in, okay? And that'll be the next step. So if you can't happen to find a community firmware that'll put Marlin 2.0 onto your Creality CR-10S Pro V2, if you can't find a community firmware, you can always reach out to us or Tiny Machines here. Now what I do is because Tiny Machines has made it quite convenient for everybody to just, if you know how to use Visual Studios, you can go ahead and open up Visual Studios, okay? Now if you've already went to GitHub or Tiny Machines and spoke with them and downloaded their resource, you just go ahead and you go under File in Visual Studios. Here, I actually already have it loaded because I use it all the time. Now we're gonna wanna open a folder. So I'm in my firmwares. I'm gonna scroll down to my Tiny Machine multi-firmware. Click on that, select the folder. It's gonna load everything in now. This is gonna take a second. And once we're all loaded in, we'll go ahead and we wanna go to Platform INI. Now the reason we go here is because if you take a look, and I've already got it highlighted out, they have all of the Creality machines on here pretty much. Not some of the newer ones, they might have made one more recent for some of the newer printers. I just haven't downloaded it yet. But this one has, you know, your Ender 3, your CR-10, your CR-10 Pro. It has them all. It even has you know, stuff set up for the mosquito, hot end, etc., things like that. So we've already went ahead and selected the CR-10S Pro V2, and we just want the BIL file. So what we go ahead and do now is we're going to compile this. While it's compiling, I'm going to actually take my USB, plug it into the printer. This is the nice thing about this, is you can flash it right from Visual Studios. So once this is done compiling, it just takes a minute. That's just the 5-volt sending power to the screen and stuff like that. You guys hear turning on. You don't need your machine on to do this process if you're doing it through Visual Studios. It's just my preferred way to do it. There are different ways You can put Marlin 2.0 on this printer. There are other YouTube videos online, as well as resources for the firmware. I just prefer to do it this way. And we'll just double check here. I'll scroll and make sure I didn't have any other printers highlighted. Because if you do, it's going to mess things up. No, just the one. So basically you just uncomment it by, you just backspace a little number sign away, and that's called uncommenting it. So now that we have a success, everything is green, that's great. We just go ahead and there's this little arrow over here if you've got it plugged into your printer. What that's going to do, it's going to recompile and run another check, and then it's going to send the firmware to your printer without having to use an SD card or any of that. So if you were just compiling and having this saved to the folder on your computer, and it'll turn into a hex file, you'll actually have to use, say, Prusa Slicer or Cura or something along those lines to actually flash it, because it's not a bin file, it's a hex file. But Visual Studios makes everything nice and easy. As you can see, it's actually writing the firmware to the motherboard right now. So once that's done, we're just going to hook up to Pronterface and set up our offsets for the BL Touch, and should be ready to print. There is one thing you'll have to do, and I'm going to show you guys how to change this on the screen, because with the new screen firmware, you can actually change your E-steps, your offsets and things like that. So that's something nice that Tiny Machines has thrown in there to make life a little bit easier. It wasn't in the menu before. So it's just reading what it wrote to the motherboard. And then once we get another success and green lights across there, we're good to go. We can unplug, turn the printer on, and go through the next steps. Okay, so everything was a success. The printer flashed. I'm going to go ahead and unplug it from the Visual Studios here, because we're all done that part. So the next step is let's just turn on and make sure our firmware works correctly. It'll just take a minute for the screen to load up. Now we're fully loaded here. Now the first step I want you guys to do, this is very important. On a Micro Swiss Direct drive, my personal opinion is set the E-steps to 140. I've never went wrong. Every machine I've upgraded here, I've always went ahead and done 140. So settings, tools, steps per millimeter. You can see here it's at 93. You could change this in Visual Studios, but just for your reference here, we'll go ahead and 140. Okay, now we've got them set to 140. Do not mess with the rest of them. You can mess with the offsets now, so we won't do it through Pronterface. We'll actually just go ahead and set our offsets here. We're not going to set Z, of course, but we're going to set Y and X because they are different from stock. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to set X to negative 45 and Y to negative 15. Okay, and Z we don't know yet. We'll go through and do that next. Store settings. Now our settings are stored. So what I like to do, now what I'll do is we will go into the leveling feature. So the printer's going to go over. Now, first time setting up a BL Touch, new firmware. Are we going to let that pin run into the bed? God, no. We're going to put our finger under it, and it works. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and we're just going to heat up our bed. So now with this Tiny Machines firmware, you can see we're ready for 300C. You can make all these changes if it wasn't ready if you're using the Visual Studios way. So we're going to go ahead and, oops, we're not going to actually heat up the nozzle. Okay, we're going to heat up the bed to 60. And the reason being is we're going to go into the leveling option again. So we'll go settings, leveling. It's going to home. Now once you're into the leveling menu, you want to go ahead, turn auto bed leveling on. We're at 0 right now, so we're going to take our piece of paper. It moves freely. We're just going to move that Z level down. Watch with your eye, because I don't want to get too close to his carbon fiber I don't want to be scratching that at all, see? It's a little close, back off one, too loose. There we go. Now, with that being said, guys, you might have to adjust when you start your print. If you already own one of these machines, you know it's as easy as hitting adjust and then baby stepping with the Z offset buttons for your first layer, okay? All right, guys, so there you have it. That's my installation and the way I prefer to do the micro switch direct drive on a CR-10S Pro V2. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment in the box down below. And don't forget to subscribe, tell your friends about us. Also, if you guys have any interesting videos you'd like to see us do, you can leave it down in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.